Today we talk to Danny Namerow. Many of the people we've met with on this show have sold their businesses to private equity funds. Many of them have gone incredibly well. Danny actually regrets his decision. And even though he got an amazing valuation for the company at 12 times earnings, he lost something along the way. He lost the legacy of the business he built. He had over 6,000 customers at the peak of his company, and 90% of them went away after he sold the business. And so if he had to do it over again, he actually wouldn't sell it, or he would have sold to someone different. And so I think the lessons that we learned from Danny in this episode are really important ones. Welcome back to The Turn. I'm Corey Mitchell of Iconic Founders. The Turn is where blue-collar founders talk about the businesses they've built, the value they've created, and what comes next after they sell. Welcome to The Turn, Danny Namerow. Super excited to hear your story. I love the fact that you've kind of moved your life to a warm tropical climate post-exit. So I'm going to want to hear all about it. Maybe as we get going, maybe just tell us a little bit about you and your background.
The easiest way to say it is that I'm guilty of dropping out of two really good universities and becoming an electrician, which my father was essentially punishment. I joke about it now. It's been almost a 30-year punishment. It was my last chance to continue to live in the house. And it turned out that, working with my hands, being able to see things grow and be constructed on a daily basis, for lack of a better term, was exactly what I needed. Sitting at a desk is not necessarily my cup of tea.
So your dad was an electrician. Did he own a business?
He owned a company that was named after my brother and I, Farryn Electric. So I named my electrical company after my sister because she said, how come all of the men in the family get to have the names of the companies be named after themselves and the sons and the brothers, so on and so forth. So Farron is my sister's first name.
I love that. What was your dad like that made him go into business, and how did that inspire you to start your own thing?
So my father is very traditional and still is to this day. The first thing I learned from my father was not to put all of your eggs in one basket. So in that regard, we worked on 3 homes for one family for approximately 9 years. The smallest home was around 16,000 square feet. And initially, when this relationship started between this gentleman and my father, everything was very warm, very familial. But the more the money accrued for this man and his family, the more distant he became. And eventually, my father wasn't dealing with this person. He was dealing with the accountant. He was dealing with the secretary of the accountant, so on and so forth. And it became very impersonal. I watched my father, between decisions that he made as well as an injury that he got in a car accident, kind of watch that business dwindle down to nothing.
Talk about customer concentration risk.
Major. I mean, it was unbelievable. And by the way, the things that I learned on these jobs were priceless. But there was that hard lesson wherein you must diversify. I taught for 6 years. I taught electrical theory, contracting, the National Electrical Code, so on and so forth. And it was during a period wherein I took off because my second daughter was being born, that I had planned on spending a lot of time with my new daughter, as well as my wife, and trying to be as supportive as possible. I then had another inrush of requests for work, and that's where Farryn Electric was born.
Tell us about those early years of being in business. Like what worked, what didn't work, and how did you take some of those lessons to make a successful business that was eventually become sellable?
When I started Farryn Electric, I really thought the epitome of success was working for builders, was working on large luxury homes. And so I would say for the first 3 of the 8 years that I owned Farryn Electric, We were working for luxury home builders in the main line of Pennsylvania, and we were losing money. We were in the red every stinking year. So I didn't learn the lesson that I should have at that particular point. It was when I brought in certain people, and they say, surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, especially in certain areas of business. And this particular gentleman, I'll gladly mention his name, John Neal. He's a very good friend to this day. And he said, you've got to do two things. You need to diversify. And what he meant by that was stop working for builders. Get into the service business. Start using flat rate pricing. Start offering packages. And that is when we saw this business just take off. It was unbelievable. The difference in the success that we had with the business was night and day between working for builders and working directly with the homeowner.
Diversify, flat rate pricing, and package pricing. I understand diversification, of course. Tell us what you mean by flat rate pricing.
So we were really killing the business by, delivering our proposals based upon time and material. Now, flat rate pricing is based upon time and material. However, it just kind of condenses things and it allows you to work a lot quicker. So with the flat rate pricing, you're gathering all of your expenses, you're adding your profit, plus possibly a little bit more, and you obviously putting in the net that you would like to get, the net margin that you would like to get. And now all of a sudden you have the capability of going to somebody's house and immediately telling them how much a job is going to cost. There's no wait time. It cuts down on decision-making time, so on and so forth. And it really, really expedites the process, which makes you much more successful, for sure.
That puts a lot of risk on you if your guy prices it wrong. How do you figure out how to train that team who has the real potential to put you at risk out there when they're estimating jobs?
We had our greatest success with a company called ServiceTitan, and I'm sure you're familiar with ServiceTitan.
Very.
We tried a few others. So with ServiceTitan, I could in real time see exactly what these guys were doing when they were pricing the job. Another thing that is absolutely important is that when you do this, you're essentially asking an electrician to become a salesperson, and not everyone is going to connect with that. But I truly believe that everyone is a good salesperson as long as they do one thing, and that's just be themselves. So we had guys that were excellent salespeople. And, another gentleman who ended up being my right-hand man in the field, a gentleman by the name of Robert, was, in his own words, a horrible salesperson. And I said to him, well, grasp that, embrace that. In other words, just be yourself. And when you do that, you'll learn. When Rob settled down and just became himself, essentially stopped trying to sell and just dispensed information, he literally sold the largest service job that Farryn Electric ever was contracted for, and it was a little over $100,000. It was about $123,000 worth of work.
What was your typical size job?
The smaller, the better. In other words, I truly believe that the quicker we get in, the quicker we get out, the more money we make. So we were trying with one man, or one team, I should say, to do an average of 2 to 3 jobs in a specific workday.
Okay.
Essentially, looking in the $3,000 to $4,000 range was a success for us, for sure.
People have this idea that big jobs are better. And my experience is the exact opposite. The bigger takeaway from an exitability standpoint, buyers hate them because they say, I have no idea if that big job that Danny got last year is ever coming back. But it's a lot easier to understand how I'm going to spin up my marketing machine and get $2,000 and $3,000 jobs over and over and over again. And if I lose one of them, guess what? It's not going to kill my month. Might suck for the day. And at the same time, to your point, you're in and out. You're getting paid much quicker, so your cash flow's better. And the margins tend to be just dramatically better on those small jobs.
Indeed. I completely agree.
I hate to do this, but I want to dive more into this sales guy concept. What you just said is you actually believe every one of those people can sell. I want to like dig into that for a minute, because everybody I know in this contracting arena struggles with this exact concept.
The key is to make it as easy as possible for them to educate the client, as well as really educate them. In other words, my father used to say, you've got two ears and one mouth, use them proportionately, right? So you need to learn how to shut your mouth, listen to the needs of the client, and then come back and kind of redirect where they're going, or become the conductor again, if you will. I truly believe that just about anyone can become a good salesperson.
I want to dive into one more concept before we start kind of getting to the meat of the conversation, which is to, building your business to sell it. But this package pricing, can you just tell us a little bit what you mean by that and why that was critical for you?
Cannot necessarily be done in every single scenario, but you'd be surprised, or people would be surprised at how many times or how many situations you can use packages. And why do we use packages? It's very simple. If I give somebody one price, they have two choices. I either get a yes or I get a no. And it's all built into the human psyche. If you try to aim at giving a customer three options, and going back to the human psyche, they never want to be the cheapest, right? They never want to do the most expensive thing, although I love the customers that always did. They're always going to fall into that middle package. I believe the statistics say around 70% of the time they're going to fall into that middle package. So then you can kind of flip it on its head. And what I mean by that is put your most interesting, your most profitable, the parts that are most easy to install, throw them all in the middle package.
One of the things that's not talked about enough is if you're selling a service by the hour, think of law firms, think of accounting firms. Well, a lot of construction firms also sell by the hour. And one of the challenges of selling things by the hour is that you're automatically capped at how many hours you can sell per person, right? The average guy works 2,080 hours a year. You're capped at selling that many hours in a year. Danny talks to us about value selling. If you can figure out how to actually sell for more value per revenue hour, you're able to unlock tremendous amount of profitability in your company. Danny changed his pricing from time and materials to fixed price contracts. And what that allows you to do is increase your productivity and therefore increase your margin per man hour. And when he unlocked that lesson, the profitability in his company just went through the roof. And now a little bit about our sponsor. I live in Colorado, super dry here. And for years, I put an electrolyte in my water. It just makes me want to drink it more. I tell all the businesses I work with, keep your guys hydrated. We talk about hydration as one of the number one points of safety. I've been using Salt of the Earth. This stuff's great. It's got great flavor. You can just throw them in your bag, and wherever you go, just throw it in the water bottle. It'll keep you hydrated, and they taste great. The grapefruit's my favorite flavor. They also have this 4-pack that's pretty sweet. You can try them all. And now they've introduced the creatine, which is also awesome because it's one of these things everyone's talking about now. You got to get your creatine in every day. So try Salt of the Earth. For all the listeners of The Turn, you can get a 15% discount. Just use code ICONIC or click the link in the show notes. This stuff is gold. I love it. What's the trajectory of the business now, moving from this point forward?
It was unbelievable. We skyrocketed in revenue. I actually pared down the amount of people working for me out in the field. And we just, like I said, the success of the business, the fact that we had six teams on the road, I believe it was six at the very end, but had a book of over 4,000 clients just tells you how successful we became. So it was literally night and day. We went from struggling and having to take lines of credit to me starting a car collection because we had so much extra money. So the trajectory was quite astonishing, to say the least.
So were you 100% owner of the company?
Yes.
Okay. So this is your baby. You're building it out. I know that one of the things you did is you got involved in a program with Goldman Sachs. Tell us what that was called and what that meant for you.
Goldman Sachs 10K was a pivotal moment for me. And there's two reasons why. On the very first day, and the very first thing that was asked of us was, what's your exit plan? And as soon as they said that, I remembered exactly a lesson that my father taught me. And that was, when running wire from point A to point B, it is imperative that you put the boxes, AKA the destinations, you fix them to the wall, you set them, because how can you run a wire from point A to point B if you don't know where point A and point B are? We can take that analogy and we can certainly apply it to the business. In other words, I have to know, everyone who is in business has to know what their exit plan is. The other thing that was absolutely pivotal, and I immediately went home and started create a document about what would Danny want in this situation? What would Dan do in this particular situation? So creating SOPs for the business was pivotal with regard to what I learned in 10KSB, and having a structured exit plan was also pivotal.
I'm curious, in your version of an exit plan, what were some of the key things that you remember putting in the document?
Wow. Well, it certainly wasn't selling my business. It was really leaving a legacy for my family. That was my ultimate focus. If I had to do it over again, I probably would have followed my initial thought, which was keeping the business, scaling it, stacking it, and essentially either leaving it for my employees to run or giving it to my family. We had a new revenue target every single year. Really, it came down to what I refer to as stackability. In other words, in any business, if you have expertise, and I'll go to the electrical side of things. If you have an expertise in the electrical business, if you have a warehouse with all kinds of parts and materials and things like this, we kind of put the blinders on and have this singular focus on being a residential electrician. But I had dreams of expanding and finding other revenue streams that could be supported by Farryn Electric. One of them was a landscape lighting, a low voltage landscape lighting company. What people don't understand, what homeowners don't understand, is they're paying, thousands of dollars in labor for low voltage landscape lighting, when low voltage landscape lighting is something that literally anyone can do. The human body cannot be hurt by 12 or 24 volts. So in that regard, one of the things that I was thinking about was stacking. How can we create other revenue streams using the expertise that my team and myself already have?
One of the things you see in private equity investment, as an example, is they take a business that's got one service line, and as soon as they close the deal, they figure out how to immediately add organic growth by adding a new service line. Danny calls it stackability. Think about it this way. If you've got a tree services business, you remove trees because the tree falls down, same customer needs things like plant healthcare in his yard to preserve the health of his trees, or prune the trees so that they don't fall on your house, so on and so forth. Those kind of service line add-ons can take the same customers, the same sales team, the same people doing the work, and adds immediate new revenue opportunity. And usually the margin's higher because you're already on site. So you said that you got the business, up to, did you say 6 crews by the time you sold?
Actually, we scaled back to 6 crews. I was much more successful having a smaller company. We created maybe less revenue, but our margins were much greater because there was communication, which is an absolute killer in business, especially large businesses. It became a lot easier because we had a smaller number of crews. I mean, I was running at one point when I was working with contractors and home builders, we had 23 electricians working for us. To scale down to a little bit less than half of that, we actually became more successful.
One of the things that Danny found is as he got a little bit bigger, I think he felt like he started losing control of the business. So he actually scaled down to a smaller team. And interestingly, he found that the margin of his business went up and the quality of his life improved.
I had a team that could run this business with their eyes closed. But the fact of the matter is I cared. I absolutely 100% trusted my whole entire team to run this company. And once again, if I had to do it over again, I'd be living in Costa Rica, continuing to have Farryn Electric, but have other people run.
Let's now walk towards selling the company. How did this even come about? So, you'd built this business, you felt really good, the margins are great. Why did you decide to go through the process, and how did it even come about? How did they reach you?
So I thought these were people prank calling me. I think this gentleman who was head of acquisitions probably called me 3 times. It was on the third occasion that I didn't hang up on him, that I did start to listen to him, that I had verified that they had bought other businesses, specifically the HVAC business that kind of took my business in, and that this guy was real. And I don't know what the economic environment is like now, but they offered me almost 12 times my EBITDA. And that's unheard of. That's like crazy money. So we were doing really well, and I was living a really, really nice life. But at that time, what I was offered was game-changing money. I literally overnight became a newly minted multimillionaire. And that to me seemed really, really attractive. I was offered above and beyond that initial buyout, what's referred to in the business as an earnout. So for 2 years, I was to work for the company that bought mine. And that's where I really learned my true business life lessons. And that is that no amount of money can replace the calm, the security, the confidence that a business owner gets from being in control of that business. And just about every single thing that they said that they were going to do was not followed. It became, with all due respect to them, an absolute nightmare. And I remember my brother saying, Dan, I don't care if they ask you to pick up wire nuts off the bathroom floor, suck it up for your earnout. And there are some people that can do that. There are some people that are so corporate that they can just follow along like a robot. And I am just not that person. So I actually structured a deal with them where I received my first year's earnout and a portion of the second year's earnout for me to leave a year early. And really in that 1 year that I worked there and essentially watched them, for all intents and purposes, kill everything that I worked so hard to build. We lost all but 10% of my book. I spent that year looking from Portugal to Mexico for a place to take my family and have a bit of a different experience, because I lived in the same town for, 37 years. So that's how I ended up in Costa Rica.
I hear you loud and clear. It sounds like looking back, you wouldn't have done the deal. You have regrets that maybe you could have just put a management team in place, lived out some of your family's dreams in Costa Rica, and continue to own and cash flow the business. What can our listeners glean from that, and how should they be thinking about protecting themselves as they're potentially moving towards selling their company? What would you have done differently? Let's just say you decided to go through with it anyway. How would you have negotiated that differently, or how would you have thought differently about who bought your company?
That's a great question. I think, and by the way, I had a great attorney. I really, truly did. But we're dealing with a multi-billion-dollar, company that really stuck to their guns and had a team of attorneys, so on and so forth. So I guess my first piece of advice would be something that, once again, my father taught me, and that is defer liability, especially when it's something, when it concerns something that you are not an expert in. So if you don't know how to structure that purchase agreement, if you don't know how to structure a shareholders agreement, things like this, you better have a good attorney that kind of, for lack of a better term, holds you back and says, wait a second, Dan. And by the way, my attorney did. There's this internal and external struggle with, should I sell? And it always came down to that 12 times EBITDA. And it blinded me to these little asks, if you will, in the asset purchase agreement, and these little, promises in the asset purchase agreement that I ignored because the money was so good. So if I had any advice to give, stick to your guns. If there's one company that is interested in buying your company, I promise you there's another one as well. And the reason why I'm saying that is because at the same exact time I sold my company, the gentleman Seth, who I had mentioned before, literally a week before I sold my company, sold his HVAC company to another venture capitalist firm. And they are the absolute antithesis of whom I sold to. I try not to be jealous. I try not to look too deeply into the past, but he's still working for them and he loves them. And this company followed through with everything that was written into the asset purchase agreement. It was, like I said, the absolute antithesis of my situation.
I think this is a really great point. Really understanding who you're getting in bed with is so critical, right? And doing your diligence there, interviewing people they've already bought before, finding out how they think about partnership and people and contracts. It just must have. But I think the most important thing you said is know your value, right? If you have a valuable business to them, to your point, it's valuable to many people. And it's a reason why I usually say, hey, look, don't necessarily take the first offer you get. Even if you end up with the buyer that approaches you first, it's worth kind of looking around and having some representation and going out there and seeing who else is out there. If you're going to sell anyway, you might as well make sure you end up with the right deal and the right partner. And even if it's the same multiple or valuation, you could have wildly different terms with a wildly different partner. Silver lining, you got 12 times EBITDA. You got 1 year of your earnout. I'm looking at a beautiful house in the background in Costa Rica. It seems like the flip side of the regret is you were able to live out this lifelong, I don't know if it's lifelong, your family's dream of moving out of the country, in your case to Costa Rica. Tell us about the experience post-exit. How's life been?
Life has been really, really good. A couple of lessons that I've learned. Number one is that, everyone should find their Costa Rica. When I had my business, I was putting my family second, and now I put my family first. And for anyone to be successful, I truly believe that is a necessity, that you've got to put your family and your faith first, and that will allow you to be more successful in business. I've opened up 2 businesses, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got millions of dollars and I need to diversify. Money not spent is scared money, all of these things. But the biggest lesson I learned in that is that I was inspired because in the electrical business, you can see something being created daily. For my own sanity, for my wife's sanity, I started an electrical company here called Costa Rica, and I'm back in the field doing work, and I've never been happier because I'm working with my hands, I'm doing physical work, and last but not least, I get to see things being created on a daily basis.
On that note, I'm leaving the conversation super pumped. I want to find my Costa Rica someday. I'm sure everyone else is going to be looking up ways to find theirs coming out of this interview. Super appreciative of the wisdom and the story that you've shared, and just grateful to get the lessons learned from you. Danny Namerow, thanks for being on The Turn.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Corey.
I think one of the things we can learn from Danny is, finding your Costa Rica might take many shapes, but he's able to do something that is often really hard for founders to find. He was able to find a way to really put his family first and live the life that he'd always sought after. Danny's found his Costa Rica in a way he probably wouldn't have if he didn't sell. And while there may be some regret, it's a pretty incredible life he's built. Thanks for watching The Turn. I'm absolutely loving these stories, and I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing and forwarding this on to a friend that might enjoy it. Let's win.